Welcome back, scholars. I'm happy you came back for day 2 of Brain Camp, as if you had a choice, but you always have a choice in your learning. So I hope you pay especially close attention today as I teach you some information about how to do hard things. All right, let's get started. All right, welcome back to Brain Camp 2020, where understanding your brain can rock your learning. We're on day 2, but before we can begin day 2, let's review our targets from day 1. So day 1 had 2 targets to it. Learn and identify the major parts of the brain. That was hard. And 2, think that your brain is amazing. I didn't think that one was so hard because your brain is amazing. But number 1 is hard. I don't want you to get down on yourself if you don't remember all the different lobes and the major parts. It's difficult. There were new words in there and not much in your brain to stick it to. You didn't have neurons that were creating pathways. So whenever you're learning something hard, you have to review it often in order to really learn it. So let's do a little bit of review. I told you I was going to give you some mnemonic devices. I love the way this word is spelled. I don't even know if I know another MN word, mnemonic devices. And it's really just a brain memory trick. But you know, at Riverside, we are vocabulary strong. So if we can use big vocabulary words, we're going to do it. So here was the mnemonic device I gave you. I gave you the first letters of all of the lobes. And I said, think frying pot. Here he is taking a frying pot and he's hitting his head. It's not frying pan, because pan doesn't fit our letters here, but think pot because the frying pot is hot. So it rhymes with pot, rhymes with hot. F is for the frontal lobe. P is for the parietal lobe. O is for the occipital lobe. And T is for the temporal lobe. Now, I'm going to go through those lobes again and give you some ways to remember those vocabulary words. Frontal lobe, not so hard because it's located up front, right behind your forehead, kind of coming up to the middle part of your brain. And you think of front, so frontal lobe makes sense. And I wanted to remind you that that is where, when you are processing language, and if you're learning another language, it is processed there. It's the neurons in this area of the brain and the frontal lobe that are trying to make connections. Also, as you practice your behavior and your self-control, that takes place in the frontal lobe. Any planning that you do, like how you're going to go about your day or things that you're going to do to get from one place to another, that planning takes place there. Back to behavior and self-control, that isn't developed in the frontal lobe. Your frontal lobe isn't developed until you're an adult, so between 18 and 20 years old. So sometimes young kids make silly decisions that seem like they don't have much self-control, but really it is just your frontal lobe that's trying to make connections so that you know how to handle new situations. All of that takes place in your frontal lobe. Next, we have the parietal lobe. Now, parietal is a tough word, and so I gave you a visual for a memory trick to remember it. Think of a pear. He's angry. He's in a riot with an apple. And he riots with the apple and he wins because he's taller than the apple. Pear, riot, tull. Just a little memory trick to help you remember that. The parietal lobe is responsible for touch. It's responsible for taste. Temperatures that you feel when maybe things that you touch that are like hot or cold, but also as you go outside and you feel temperatures, all of that is processed here. And when you are doing math and you are problem solving, that is coming from your parietal lobe. So your teacher might say, okay, activate those parietal lobes. We're ready to do our math calculations. That all comes from the parietal lobe. Next we have the occipital lobe. And the third graders gave me a great memory trick to remember this. Think in the back of your head. Well, the occipital lobe, first of all, is where vision. Its primary purpose here is strictly just processing everything that you see. So your vision. So think of an octopus coming out of the back of your head. I put a Band-Aid on him because I think occipital sounds a little like hospital. Occipital. hospital. And then I put this, the octopus is sipping something here, a glass of water. He's sipping it, occipital, to help you to remember that. Now, I know it seems silly, but really when you are trying to learn something new, the more outlandish you can make your visual on it, the easier it is for your brain to remember because it's something unique and new. So that occipital lobe is responsible for vision. And finally, we have the temporal lobe. So I put this little emoji on there, and he has a temper, like when you're mad. The temporal lobes are on the side, and it's like smoke is coming out of your ears because you have a temper. I guess it has a little bit to do with temper, being its emotions, but it's more like your fears and your excitement are processed in this temporal lobe. And the two things that we're going to talk about later in our brain camp is the hippocampus and the amygdala. Those third graders gave me a good way to remember amygdala, and I can't for the life of me remember what it is. For me, I don't need a memory trick, and so sometimes I have a hard time coming up with it. The hippocampus, though, we talked about how there's a hippo, and he's at a camp, and he goes to a camp in the United States, hippocampus, U.S. He goes to a camp in the United States, and there, you know how some kids go to a camp for sports, and some kids go to a camp for Girl Scouts or Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts. Well, this hippo goes to a camp to learn and to work on his memory, how to memorize things, because that's what the hippocampus does. It is where your memories are processed from your learning. Now, the amygdala, we're going to talk a lot about that, and if you are a Riverside Rocket and you've done brain camp before, you will remember that the amygdala is where we talked about the guard dog, keeping that guard dog down when the guard dog flares up. But we're going to spend a whole day on that later on because, I think the amygdala is very important. Unless we can keep that amygdala under control, the hippocampus cannot even work on the learning and memory. All right, so we have our temporal lobe there. Neurons. We talked about neurons, and we're going to take a closer look at that. Remember, we said there were about 100 billion of them. We're going to take a closer look at that today. So in particular, though, with those neurons, we're going to focus on the myelin. Think my violin, because myelin is a new word for a lot of people. But myelin is, here's our two neurons in the brain. You can't see my hands, but I'm like making fists. And the neurons are making a connection when we learn something. So once we learn something, it's like a roadway or a path that comes. But myelin is when we learn something inside, outside, upside down, and we don't have to think it through anymore. We don't have to process it. We don't have to process 6 times 7 is 42 because we just have committed it to memory. Before we have that myelin built, you might be like, 6 times 7, 6 times 7. Let's see, 6 times 5 is 30. So one more 6 would be 36. And 36 plus one more 6 is 42. And you have to go through all these steps to do it. But once you have myelin on that, you say 6 times 7, 42. You don't have to think about that anymore. Think, to remember this vocabulary word in your brain, think my violin, myelin. Myelin is, you might have myelin on your name, of course, and how to spell your name. And you might have myelin on all the names of people in your class by the end of the year, or hopefully even by the end of next week. And myelin on all the names of your cousins or the people in your family. But myelin also helps in our math facts, like I mentioned before. It also helps in all our learning. So anything that we want to learn, whether it's language or geography or anything that we want to learn that we don't want to have to think it through, we just want it right there, we can build myelin on it. So that was day 1, learning and identifying the major parts of the brain and thinking that the brain was amazing. And that leads us into day 2. Building on that idea of myelin, know how to build myelin. If we say myelin is our most efficient way of learning, we probably should spend some time talking about how you build it. So remember my violin. And the way to build it is to do hard things. What hard things do you want to do? Think about that. What do you want to learn? So you might be like, well, in school, I want to know my math facts because everybody talks about them, and I have older brothers or sisters or cousins, or my mom and dad are like, you just got to know them. So that's one of the goals that I have this year. Or maybe you're like, I want to become a better reader because I'm positive that in order for me to become a better scholar, I need to improve my reading, so I want to become a better reader. But it could be something like, I want to learn how to do a trick on my skateboard, or I want to become a faster runner. It can be any goal that you have set for yourself that is a hard thing that you want to do, and you want to build some myelin on it. So it's not like you're just starting on it, but you want to build some myelin on it. So here's the thing about your brain. Your brain wants to do things that are easy. It wants to do things that are efficient. That means you do it in the quickest amount of time. And your brain is always seeking pleasure. It wants to stay happy. It's just how your brain is wired. And anytime you go away from that, you have to fight your brain because it always wants to go back to easy, efficient, and seeking pleasure. So you have to learn how to fight your brain. Your brain wants to stay in this comfort zone because in that comfort zone, your brain feels safe. It feels easy. It feels comfortable. You can hear the word comfort and comfortable in there. And the thing about the comfort zone is it can get a little boring. The excitement of life is not done inside that comfort zone, even though it feels safe and easy. What we want to do is move to this next zone, this learning zone. It's where we feel excited. It's where we feel alive. We feel challenged. We feel willing to take even bigger risks. But sometimes what happens is we are in this comfort zone. We skip right over the learning zone and we go to this panic zone. And our panic zone can look like this. You can be fearful. So you can be scared. That can be your panic zone. But your panic zone can be kind of crabby. Maybe you know of a time your teacher has asked you to do something, or your parents have asked you to do something, or somebody in your family, and you get crabby about it. That's an indication to you that you're in your panic zone. You get anxious, which I think is a little like fearful, where your heartbeat starts to get going and your palms get sweaty. And sometimes when you're in the panic zone, you feel really tired. You find yourself yawning a lot. It's your body's way, your brain's way of protecting you. It's like, no, we're in the panic zone. We're in the panic zone. So instead of being in that panic zone, we want to think in our head like, oh, good, I'm going to head towards that learning zone. Kind of having a conversation with yourself in your head. Hooray, I'm in this learning zone. I recognize this panic. I just need to take some deep breaths and get myself back into that yellow learning zone. In the learning zone, and I know you guys have felt this, scholars, is where you find what I call your learner's joy. Your learner's joy is that internal joy that comes when you have worked really, really hard at something, and working hard at it, you just have this surge of joy, like, oh my gosh, I've gotten it. As a teacher, I call it teacher's joy. When we see a kid experience learner's joy, we're like, oh, it is the best feeling as a teacher. I feel like when I see you in your learner's joy, I get to feel it myself. I have a video of this BMX biker. I'm going to warn you, this kid's a little precocious, which means he's kind of funny and smart alecky. But he is somebody that is a 9-year-old, and he's a BMXer. And he talks about how it's hard. And of course, practicing makes progress for him. He keeps practicing at it, but he finds like it's worth it. So listen, he's going to talk a little bit about how he feels when he does something that's hard.
It's worth getting hurt because when you land it feels fantastic.
That's learner's joy.
My name's Connor, and I'm 9 years old. out from San Diego, and I'm a BMXer, blah, blah, blah. When I landed my first trick, I think I was 2. I've landed a 360 Superman, bar spin, tail whip, backflip, double backflip, and more. I can't do more. My bike sometimes breaks. My dad fixes it for me though. Blah, blah, blah. The biggest lesson my parents have taught me is you guys haven't taught me anything. My next goal is to be a pro BMXer. Yes. Thanks for watching. I have to go pee now, so bye-bye.
You heard him right. He said, thanks for watching. I have to go pee now. But I want to tell you, he has practiced a lot, and we know our practice makes progress. The better you want to get at something hard, the more you practice it. What used to be hard becomes easy. I heard him say he's been doing that since he was 2 years old. And when he lands it, he has learner's joy. He said it feels so good. It's worth the risk. You could see they had everything set up for him to practice. Excuse me. And so they had all those cushions and stuff. So it wasn't like he just flipped his bike the first time. They kept him safe doing it. But I did notice this. He felt very comfortable in doing his BMXing. I think, where he was acting a little silly, I think he felt uncomfortable talking in front of a camera. So that's why he was being silly. So before, when I said sometimes in our panic zone, I think it can also look like silliness. When we're a little embarrassed and we're not quite sure what to do, we can act a little silly with what we're doing. So all that to talk about learner's joy. It is when you work hard at something and you finally achieve it. And the thing about learner's joy, I said I always say it's like a bubble bath for your brain. It just feels so good. But the thing about learner's joy is the harder you have to work at it, the greater the learner's joy. So, but you have to remember your brain is always fighting it. When you want to do something that's hard, your brain will put up its dukes and want to fight you. And you have to be like, okay, nope, we've got this. Just settle down. All right. So here are some tips to building myelin. So I use this acronym, TIP, for TIPS. And the first tip that I have for you is take off in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What you do is, I read this book called The 5-Second Rule, and it was real simple. It said this: when you want to do something that's hard, think in your head, I want to do that, and I'm going to take off and do it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then start doing it. So if you have a goal, like let's say you're in writing class and you're like, oh, I don't feel like writing, and you can feel your brain fighting you, and you have to take over, think to yourself, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and just start writing. So often we don't move forward because we're too afraid to take that first step. So my first tip is T for takeoff in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. The I is for I am statements. When you want to do something that's hard, put it in an I am statement, even if it's not true. We'll be talking this week or this brain camp about how you can fool your brain into doing things that it might not want to do. So if you want to get better at math, you tell yourself, I am a mathematician. I'm somebody that thinks about numbers and I think about math outside of school. And suddenly you're going to find that you start doing that. If you want to get better at reading, tell yourself, I am a reader. I'm the type of person that reads at night before they go to bed. I'm the type of person that if I'm in class and I have a few extra minutes, I just open up my book and start reading because I am a reader. If you want to get better at skateboarding, say to yourself, I am a skateboarder. I'm the type of person that goes home and practices their skateboard at night because I know practice makes progress. And so I am just actively always trying to get better at skateboarding. That's your I am statements. And the last tip I have for you is the P, pair up. If you want a new goal, stick it with a habit you already do well. For example, I do well watching Netflix, but a habit I'd like to get better at is moving and exercising more. So I pair up one of the shows that I'm watching and I tell myself I can only watch that show if I exercise at least 15 minutes before that show while I'm watching it. So I take something I already like to do that I have a habit of doing, and then I pair it up with something I want to do. I want to do more reading in the morning. I already get up and drink a cup of coffee in the morning, so I pair up my reading with my cup of coffee, and now I'm doing two things and building on my reading because I have a goal to read one book. I was doing one book a week, but now it's one book every 2 weeks. So if you want to do hard things, my tip is T for take off in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, I for I am statements, and P for pair up. All right, here's a caution about myelin that we're talking about. Myelin can be good and bad. The good news is when you want to get better at something, you keep practicing and practicing and practicing till you know it inside, outside, upside down. What used to be hard suddenly becomes easy. You've built myelin. That's a good thing. It can be bad too. If you are working on behaviors and every time it's time to do reading, you pretend and you just pretend to read and you don't do something else, you are building myelin in a bad way. This white fatty tissue is wrapping around the connections you've made, and in order to undo that, you're going to have to make a stronger connection here. That's why it's super important that you don't practice bad habits or you don't learn how to do things wrong because it's very hard to undo them. So be careful with myelin. Usually it works to our benefit, but sometimes it can be bad if we practice a habit that's bad. You have that choice. Are you going to make it something that's positive or are you going to make it something that's negative? So day 2, how did we do? Know how to build your myelin. Just as a review, do hard things. Hard things is what builds up myelin. Fight your brain's tendency to want to do things that are easy, that are efficient, that are pleasurable. And use the tips that I gave you. Take off in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Use your I am statements for the type of person you want to be and pair up your new goal and stick it with a habit you already do well. All right, at the end, since we are trying to do hard things, you may practice your boom, snap, clap. All right, scholars, how did you do? I hope you walked away from today's brain camp with some more information about the different parts of your brain, the frontal, the parietal, the occipital, the temporal lobes. The first day we threw in that cerebellum and your brainstem in there also. But today's target, I hope you really hit that. How do you build that myelin, that type of learning that you know inside, outside, upside down? And in a nutshell, you do hard things. All right, I'll see you next time. Bye.